All right, so being out here in the swamp in Old Florida, what the hell does that have to do with deep practice? What does that have to do with reps and getting better? Well, I've always believed that you train like you fight and you perform like you train. And this kind of environment has always been special to me to train people. This is where I bring my coaching students and my leaders out here to train. Yesterday, we were out on the range, and just off camera here, Dave Harrington, Super Dave Harrington, and Big West, they had my coaching students out on the flat range, and they were putting them through, a range of drills where they were doing deep practice, really deep work. And in an hour, Dave, how far did you take these guys, like from complete novice to, a pretty good level of proficiency?
In the time frame?
Yeah.
1 hour?
Yeah. An hour, right? But what matters is much less the time, it's the quality of the reps, it's the quality of the practice. Daniel Coyle in his book, The Talent Code and the Little Book of Talent, he calls it deep practice. And I'm a big fan of that. He goes on to say, Coyle does, that the difference between a pro and an amateur is their relationship to practice. And I think everybody sitting around this fire right now would nod vehemently in agreement on that one. If you ever look at a pro, and I don't care what their skill is, whether it's, Dave as a shooter, whether it's, Wes as a musician, it's all about your relationship to practice. It's all about how hard you work at those hard and soft skills that are inherent to the work that you do. Now, for the month of November, our theme has been story. And I believe firmly that story, I don't care what your discipline is, storytelling is one of the most powerful forms of strategic communication in the world. I have seen its return on investment in the millions. I have seen it raise all kinds of money for nonprofits. I've seen it help our veterans pull pistols out of their mouths, right? I've seen it change lives like that. It's that powerful. And so we're talking about it all month, and we've looked at it from the business perspective, we've looked at it from, the science perspective. But now I want to look at it from the perspective of what is absolutely essential to being good at it, which is practice. If you're going to be a good storyteller, if you're going to be a good communicator, and I don't care if you're doing it from the stage, I don't care if you're doing it in the sales room or the boardroom or in a pitch, to your clients, or communicating your vision to your associates or your employees, you got to practice, right? This notion that because you live the story or you're a so-called good storyteller, that's bullshit. That's not true, right? You're gonna probably choke, or you're gonna leave tons of value on the table if you don't practice, if you don't rehearse your communications. And this is even if you're counseling one of your employees, even if you're doing a high emotion engagement or an all hands, if you walk up there and nothing has come out of your mouth in preparation for that, you know who you're screwing over? Your people or your client. They're the one getting screwed, because they're not getting your best self. They're not getting you fully expressed. They're not getting the full version of your vision, of your dream, of what you're building, of your product, because you're not fully out there. And you have to practice this to really deliver it in a way that lands on people so that they locate themselves in your story and they want to follow you, buy from you, believe in you, right? So how do you do that? How do you practice story? Well, it's actually pretty simple. One thing is get out away from the rat race. Like, I come out here to train my guys, the guys I brought in from Comco, amazing storytellers. They're already great at it. But I can bring them out here, I can dial them up in 24 hours, and they're even better because we're out in our most natural environment. Humans are natural storytellers. So get out of the friggin' boardroom, get out of the Marriott, right? Get out of the urban jungle and get somewhere where you can really connect to your nature and watch how high your performance goes with your stories, right? So that's number one, is kind of get off grid, even if it's in your backyard, some sacred space to work on it. The next thing is with the practice of your stories, I say have a story journal, like a story. It could be a 3-subject notebook or one of those nice black binders, but label it My Story Journal, keep it somewhere handy. And 2 to 3 times a week, you should write stories in there or as they come to you. Now, the more you work this process, the more you'll see that you'll open that sucker up and stories will start to just come out. And a lot of them are going to be personal stories, but they're immediately transferable to your business. For example, one of the guys I'm coaching, Matt, he coaches basketball, and he has 5 principles that he teaches these young men. Matt, what are they? Tell me off camera. What are the 5?
Work as hard as you can.
Work as hard as you can.
Play as smart as you can.
Play as smart as you can.
Never give up.
Never give up.
Pick your teammates up when they're down.
Pick your teammates up when they're down.
And have fun.
And have fun. So we went over those out here, and now Matt's developed a story for every one of those. And they're awesome stories, right? It could be a kid who just worked harder than everybody else. He wasn't as talented, but he worked harder and ended up winning the game, right? But there's all these little narratives, but he's practiced those. And so when the moment's right, he can deliver those. But in the meantime, he writes those stories down. He gives them a little working title. Write down a few items that would help you just jog your memory. Then get on your feet and tell it, right? And what you think is a great story that you know so well, the first time you tell it, it'll be like, bleh, it's just shit, right? That's how it is, because it never sounds the same when it comes out the first time. That's why you want to practice it out here in the trees instead of dumping that crap on your audience or your employees for the first time, right? So practice it a couple of reps, and just like, you know, Super Dave and Wes out here shooting with these guys, up and down, up and down. I mean, you do it over and over again, and finally, what happens, right? You develop a skill, right? You get really good at it, but it's doing those little things over and over again. So getting off grid, writing that stuff down, get on your feet, practice it in the tell, then bring somebody in who you trust. Like, don't get some dude off the street or some jackwagon that always wants to open his mouth and like give you unfettered criticism. You know, find someone you trust, whether it's your spouse or a best friend, and share that story with them and let them just kind of give you back, let them tell the story back to you. That's really the best thing you can do. You're not asking for them whether they really like it or not, because if you chose that story, it's more like the story chose you, right? So it's sacred. So be careful that you don't invite criticism that's going to shut that thing down, because it probably has a lot of value. But rather, like if I tell my story to Wes, I'm not looking for Wes to judge that story. Like, that's where I think a lot of people mess up. What I'm asking Wes to do is to hear it, and then I'd like Wes to tell it back to me. And when Wes tells it back to me, he's going to tell it exactly as he heard it. And it's going to do what Hemingway always says, is kill my little darlings and get rid of all the details that I don't need, and he'll just give me the goods. Now I've got a really great edited version of my story that I can then go tell to my coworkers. I can tell it on all hands. I can try on a sales associate. And guys, this ain't in theory. You know me, I hate theory. If it doesn't work in life and death, I'm sure as hell not going to suggest it for when you use it in time and money. But this does work. I use it all the time. That little sequence that I just gave you will work. But you've got to be comfortable with storytelling. You got to be comfortable with being alone. You got to be comfortable with being out kind of away from things. You got to be able to go into your story. Mikey's off camera here. Mike was a law enforcement officer, and you know, he went through some stuff, man, and you know, it shaped how he is as a leader now, right, Mike? I mean, totally. But you know, when he tells some of those stories, you know, they're tough, right? And he has to go back into those stories and basically reconnect with them, and it takes a lot of courage. But when he does that, I see that Mike's a legit dude. It makes him relatable, and now I want to follow him because I trust him, right? He had the courage to go back and revisit his own story. I trust him. But how many reps have you had to do with that story, Mike, to even be able to do that?
Quite a few.
Yeah, you got to do a lot of reps. And so that's what I'm talking about, guys. This is what I mean by deep practice. And remember, pros have a deeper relationship with practice than amateurs. That's the difference. It has nothing to do, I don't think, with talent. It has to do with reps and practice and being comfortable being alone and doing the work. My rule is for every keynote speech I give, I will probably give that sucker, and I'm not kidding you, 50 to 60 times in a week before I will go on stage. I'm going to outwork everybody around me. And so when I walk up there, I know that I'm going to be able to connect in a way that that story is in my bones, and I can focus on the audience or whoever I'm talking to, and the story lives in my body because I've done so many reps with it. I don't memorize it. I just tell it in a way that I go into that place and I connect with it on my own. So this is deep work. And again, you know, Wes and I talk about this all the time. We talk about it on my podcast. I post on it on Facebook at Official Scott Mann. I do a lot of lives on Instagram at Rooftop_leader. Rooftopleadership.com has a ton of content on this, right, Wes? On storytelling. So, you know, this week it's all about, I want you thinking about practice and how to integrate practice into your life for how you communicate, right? And build a regimen for it. Have a story log, get off grid, practice it on your own, share it with a buddy, have them tell it back to you, rinse and repeat, right? It's all about practice. Thanks for what you do, and I'll see you on the rooftop.